Okay, we've done all the washing up on the crank and cleaned the block, and it's all pretty good. I'm hardly getting a dirty hand here at all. So while we're under here, we may as well measure the crank. Now, the crankshaft, when I was editing the other day, I noticed a bit of end float when I was pulling the pistons out. So what we'll do, we'll give this back journal number 4 a nice good wipe up. And I'll give number 1 a wipe too. We'll see if there's much difference from the front to back. I've still got the other journals taped up. So now, if there's a little bit of marking on the crank, big end journals, don't be shy to give it a little bit of a sand with a bit of 600 wet and dry sandpaper or something like that. Make sure the oil holes are down so you're not filling them up with rubbish. But because when the piston fires, this crank is up the top, you're up on top dead centre, and then as it fires, it goes bang and pushes this piston down, which in turn pushes all the force of that one firing onto this crankshaft journal. So you'll find over time that these aren't completely round. The side that gets a pounding, which is up near the top here all the time, even though it's flooded with oil, it's probably a little bit smaller than the side. So we'll just try and get in there if we can and have a quick measure. Just put a little bit of drag on the spindle so I can and no need to use these like a G-clamp. They can come open a little bit. And you're rocking it around, you're trying to find that you're just nice and flat on the journal. Look, I'm happy with that. And I'll actually have to hop out and have a read of that. Bloody bastard getting old, isn't it? Big end of 2.089. It looks like there's very little wear there. I'll just check that again just to make sure I'm not getting a shitty reading. Well, I'm pretty happy with that measurement. Yeah, look, 2.089, I'm calling that. Now that's a bit odd because that's slightly above size, which I don't think it would be. Now, we have to turn the crank a bit and we measure the crank at 90 degrees to that last measurement. So we'll try and open that up. Bloody sight easier on the bench than it is under here. What do we have there? Yep, 2.090. So what that shows us up here is it's 1 thou out of round. Now, I'll just try up here. I'm going to have to check this micrometer because I am coming out, but I should have checked it before I came. But anyway, we'll try the back one here. 2.089. We'll come at 90 degrees again. And what do we have there? Yep, the exact same. Same as the back one, 2.090. So you can measure all the journals like that. We're probably not going to, well, I probably will, but not on camera. I still have the other ones taped up in here. So another thing I noticed when I was pulling the pistons out and I got to the editing stage, I thought there was a fair bit of crank movement and a bit of movement in the thrust bearings. So I thought I'd bring a dial gauge up. So where are we? I've got a digital dial gauge here and it's just a Noga knockoff type stand, and we can sit that on the crank here anywhere. If there's a machine surface like that one would probably be a good one, but in our instance, if I move the camera over to the side a little bit, you can see the surface on the flywheel. Now the flywheel's bolted to the crank, so that's as good a place as any. So you expect to see some, and if we leave it one way and then the other, you'll actually notice. And see, that seems a lot to me, but seeming a lot and being a lot might be two different things. So I'll put the magnetic dial gauge on the side here. And I'll try and bring it around so I can show you what we're looking at. Now I'll try and adjust that a little bit. Can you see those figures? Yes, you can, just. Okay. So what the idea is with this is make sure that your clutch pedal's adjusted properly first. Now, the reason being, if your clutch is riding, and this is back a bit, and your clutch is riding, it'll pop it forward there, then each time you try and test it, it'll spring back on its own because your clutch isn't adjusted properly. And your throw-out's riding. So make sure your throw-out's not riding. So on here, I've got to a point where I can't, hang on, if I come around this way I might be able to see the gauge and tell you what it reads, as well as discuss what we're doing. So I'm going to put it right back and zero it. Okay, so that's zeroed. Now we're going to just lever the crank forward and just find a spot where everything works for you. Probably back here if the dial gauge isn't in the road. And we've got 19 thou end float there. Now I'm sure that's excessive, and that can be from dirty oil or people riding around with their foot on the clutch, resting the foot on the clutch. So we'll come back again, check that it's at zero. Well, we're at one, there we are at zero. Pull the clutch pedal down, and there's our 19. So that's excessive. Now on a rebuild like this, what are we supposed to have? Okay, crankshaft end float should be 5 to 12 thou. So we're way out of that spec. It looks like we've got very little big end wear, but we may have a bit of thrust wear on the thrust bearings or on the main crank here. So if you're trying to keep them from leaking oil, a crank running back and forth over the running of the machine, that will make your rear engine seal leak and things like that. Now, you can drop the centre main out. I'd suggest not trying to drop the back one out because you have these little corks up the back here, and so yeah, look, it's not really worth doing. But look, while you're here, let's just have a quick look at something. And we'll undo this centre main bearing. And the front housing you won't get down, and sometimes you can actually, an in-frame rebuild turns into a major. But anyway, that's just how it works sometimes. Now, if we can rock that cap. And down comes that cap. Now I'll give that a wipe. And are you in video? Yep, you are. And the reason I pulled that down, see this? That's your crank thrust bearings. And you have one here. Now you can see this one here, as good as gold. There's no lip. See, the crank runs around here and there's often a little lip up the top there. But when you look at this one, there's quite a lip on this one here. So it's normally the case where the worn one is on the back. Now another thing just to tell you about here is you can see the bearing on here. Now let me get my eyes right. Yeah, okay. You can see on the bearing here there's a tag, and that stops the main bearing from turning. Now you can see the shadow mark from the other one here. So when you put the bearing back up, you just line that back up again. Now there's another little trick we can do, and people ask sometimes, but you can push that top bearing back out, and we'll probably have a look at doing that. Now, another thing you can do sometimes is by turning the crank now, see this thrust bearing coming out? And that can come out because there's no tag on it to stop it coming out. Where when you look at the bottom one, there's a tag. So in the engine, they set something, well, I'll get away from there a bit. They set something like that to give you your end float. So we have a measurement for these. So we're not going to replace the main bearings, but we probably, well, I believe I can buy a set of thrust washers and we'll put them back in. So we'll go up to the bench and we'll do a little bit of measuring up there. Well, I was under the tractor measuring before, and I was measuring with this old external micrometer, and the measurements I was coming up with I wasn't happy with. I thought something's not adding up there, so I've tested this and this is out. I need to readjust that up. So I do have a metric set and a metric set of external micrometers. And look, they're not high-end ones, but they do the job for us tractor blokes anyway. And so I've remeasured the crank, remeasured the big end journal at least, and the measurement we're given is 2.987, oh sorry, 52.987 millimetres to 53. So I've done the measurements on ours, and we have out of spec measurement of 0.042 millimetres, which works out to be 1.6 thousandths of an inch. So we're out of spec 1.6 thousandths of an inch. So, and look, when you look at things like that, you think, oh, what do you do? But look, I'm going to go with that. I believe with a new set of bearings. Now, this had pretty good oil pressure. So yeah, with a pretty good oil pressure and a new set of slippers, I think we're going to be good. I'm not going to follow that any further. Now, on the back of the bearings here, just to work out what you have, if you have a look here, you'll have a part number. Then on ours, it's got STD. So that tells us that that's a standard conrod bearing. Now, if that bearing had a 0.010 or 010 or 020 or 030, well, that would mean that the crank has been ground and these bearings are oversized to take up for the ground crank. But on ours, we don't have that. We're standard, so we know that the standard measurements suit us. Now, if you had 0.10 on the back here, some of them go 0.010 and some just have 010. It depends on the brand. But if it had 010 on it, well, you just take 10 thou off your crank measurements, because your crank would be 10 thou smaller on each journal, and away you go. Now, the dark colour of that bearing looks a little bit, look, it's nearly getting a bit coppery to me. The dark colour of that bearing, I reckon this has been dusted, this old girl. But, and you know, with the thrust washers, that might tell us a story too. So, I'm going to put a standard set of bearings in. I'm not going to pull the crank out. I'm happy. Look, 1.6 thou out of range and new bearings, I'm going to go with it, just for the simplicity of it. Now, this is my verniers. I've gone digital with this to try, and it's a bit hard for me to see what you can see while I'm doing this. But if I hold it somewhere around there, we should be able to talk about it. Now, I'll get my page back over to the notes for the thrust washers. Now, the thrust washer in a Fergie should be 91 to 93 thou. So, which is 2.361 to 2.362 millimetres, I believe. So, I'm just going to work in thou on this one. Now, when we bring that up there, .90.5 thou, 90.5. I'll just check that zeroing again. Yep, close enough. .90.5 again. So that allows, we're out of spec there by 0.5 thousandths of an inch. That's nothing. I measured this before and I actually got 91 everywhere, so I was thinking this one was just on the bottom spec, but look, it's just under. For those of you can see the verniers, if I did my job a bit better, you'd see it, wouldn't you? So when we look at the back thrusts, now this is the one that was up in the block, and we'll just do a quick measurement of that. 81. That says 80 there. Even 79. 80 thou. Now this bottom one seems to be a bit all over the shop. I'll just make sure it's clean. .81.5. 81.81. There you go. 80.5. So On that, we're about 11th thou thinner than we should be on these. So we measured 19th thou crankshaft end float. So if we put a brand new set of thrust bearings in, and even if the thrust bearing's on the low side, 91, which it probably won't be, and we become 10th thou fatter here or 11th thou fatter here, well, we get our 19, take 11 off it, and that should give us like 9th thou, something like that, 8th thou, and we won't know till we get the other bearings in. But if you look at the spec, we'll be around 8 or 9 thou, depending on, well, we may even be 7, 8 or 9 thou, depending on the thickness of the new thrust bearing or thrust washer. So that brings us to the end float spec, which is 5 to 12 thou. So by just putting a set of thrust bearings in, we should be okay and bring the crank back within spec. Now the main bearings, you can slide a slipper in the middle one, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to even go there because you can't do the front and the back. So I'd rather the crank move as a unit, not be tied in the middle and loose at the end and things like that. So there you go. That's just a quick video on measuring up in under the tractor, what we found and how we're going to fix it.